So earlier I was telling someone about this drash that I'm planning to share with you all. And after I talked through all the ideas and how I would develop them, he said, "Oh, it's like the hokey pokey." So that's a teaser, all right? Stick around if you want to figure out how Parshat Shmini is like the hokey pokey. Now we're going to talk about Leviticus, okay? So reading through the book of Leviticus, as I did again, this time around, I realized something that I hadn't realized before, I'll get there, okay? So we know that Aaron is the high priest, and that means that he's going to preside over all the rituals of the ancient Israelite religion that take place at this point in the Torah in the tabernacle, which is kind of is the precursor to the temple that the Israelites will do service to God in. And that service is sacrifices, mainly animal sacrifices, some like flour and oil sacrifices. Okay, so we know that about Aaron. That's pretty iconic about Aaron. But as I'm reading through Leviticus, I realized that even though we've talked a lot about sacrifices at this point, we haven't yet seen Aaron himself perform them, right? Because in the first parsha, Vayikra, we got sort of God's, via Moses, verbal instructions for sacrifice. In the second parsha, in Tzav, Aaron was ordained as high priest. He was washed and dressed in the priestly garments. And there were a lot of sacrifices involved in the ordination, but Moses really does the main work of the offerings. And so then we've gotten to Shmini, and Aaron hasn't yet, but he will, right? He's called up to the altar in front of the whole congregation of Israel to perform sacrifices. And the whole community is assembled, right? So it's kind of like high stakes moment, and it's like his debut performance as high priest. And if that wasn't enough pressure already, right? Moses says, when you do as God commanded, God's presence, that kavod Adonai, will be revealed to you. And the you is in the plural. God's presence will be revealed to Aaron and Moses and every Israelite. If Aaron, fulfills his commandment of all of the offerings. Okay, so I'm feeling a little nervous for Aaron at this moment because I've gotten really invested in this drama. And then Aaron goes up to the altar and he starts to perform the sacrifices. And he does it exactly as he was instructed. Yeah, there's a sin offering and a burnt offering and a well-being sacrifice and a meal offering. And some of those happen multiple times. And each of them is a multi-step process. There's slaughtering animals and cutting them up and washing some parts and burning some parts in a fire. And there's a lot of dipping in blood and splattering the blood. And Aaron gets to the end of this whole sacrificial service, and he lifts up his hands, and he blesses the congregation. And that's the problem. Because the next thing the Torah says is not that God's presence was revealed. So then, I have to find I'm just totally going off these notes on what I would like to get back to a little bit. Okay, so we have the problem. And then actually the Torah says something else, right? It says that Aaron went down from the altar, and he and Moses went into the tent of meeting, and then they came out, and they blessed the people, and then God's presence was revealed. So he pulls it off, eventually, go Aaron, but that detail about the going down, tent of meeting, whatever, that's especially curious to us as readers, right? Because everything else about this ceremony was really specifically prescribed, but not that, right? There, Aaron and Moses seem to have gone off script. And therefore, it's an interesting moment for commentary, right? And Rashi asks a question, as Rashi often does. Rashi, in this case, asks, what happened in the tent of meeting? Why did they go there? What happened? Okay. Because it seems to be that's the turning point, right? That then leads to them coming out again with another blessing and God's presence. And whatever happened there is not explicit in the Torah, right? So we kind of have to fill it in. So this is one of the explanations that Rashi gives. It comes from a midrash, and it says, maybe when Aaron saw that he had performed all of the sacrifices correctly, and yet God was not present, Aaron was uneasy. And he says to himself, oh no, maybe God is mad at me. And then he looks to his brother Moses and he says, Moses, you put me up to this. And now I feel ashamed. So Moses goes with him into the tent of meeting, and they offer up a prayer to God, right? And this time, there are no animals, there's no blood, there's no fire. It's just a prayer from their hearts. And this is why God's presence is ultimately revealed. So let's build on Rashi's commentary a little bit, okay? I didn't want to claim that Rashi said all the things I thought he should say, so I figure I'll just be explicit. We're drashing on the midrash right now. Okay. I think that Aaron might have been so concerned with executing his task correctly that he forgot the real purpose of the sacrifices. The word sacrifice in Hebrew is korbanot. And, well, sacrifices, that's plural. So korban, right? And it comes from the root karev, which means to draw close. And when Aaron was simply going through the motions, he wasn't authentically present to the people, and he hasn't opened himself up in relationship to God. So although he performs the korbanot, he's actually remaining at a distance. And it's only after Aaron's moment of honesty and authenticity, first with himself, and then with his brother, and then with God in prayer, that Aaron merits for the divine presence to be revealed. Now, many of you, I think, will know this, that our prayer services that we do, they were instituted in the place of sacrifices after the destruction of the Second Temple, right? And these two systems of worship, the animal sacrifice and prayer, I would say at the surface, they seem to have very little to do with one another. I often think, like, how would you respond if I brought a calf in here and like a large knife, and a set of fire? I mean, they feel really different, right? And I'm not gonna do that. And I know we have some vegetarians here, so I just apologize. And I brought you tofu, actually, for tonight. That's true. Okay. But I think that they have something in common, right? As with the sacrifices, there are a lot of guidelines in prayer, right? There are the words and the order of the service and the times that we sit and stand and bow. And these fixed elements are called the keva of the service. And those elements can be really helpful and important to cultivating a spiritual experience. I don't want to dismiss it. But I think that a lot of us have probably have some experiences like Aaron at times, where we become suddenly concerned with, are we on the right page, or are we doing the right thing and saying the right words, and we lose our place. And I think that focusing on these elements of the service, I know for myself personally, it can keep me in my head. Am I doing it right or wrong? And that is actually keeping me at an emotional distance from the prayer experience. In addition to the keva, those fixed aspects of prayer, we also have kavanah, right? Kavanah is the intention or that emotional and spiritual presence that we bring to prayer. In his 16th century book of Jewish law, Yosef Kara writes, better a few prayers spoken with kavanah, with intention, than many prayers without kavanah. It turns out that the purpose of prayer is very similar, I think, to the purpose of sacrifice: to draw close to ourselves, to one another, and to whatever it is we experience as or understand as divine, to God. Doing this requires that we put our whole selves into the experience. It's a hint, a hokey pokey. Okay. Right? It does. It requires a whole self-experience. In the Talmud, Rabbi Ami says one's prayer is not accepted unless he places his heart in his hands. That sounds like a pretty powerful experience of prayer. And I know it's a lot to ask on any given Friday night to be fully, authentically present, to pray from like the deepest parts of ourselves. And it is a lot to ask, and it's probably won't come easily, at least not all of the time, right? It definitely doesn't come easily to me. But I think it's worth trying, especially because we're already here. Like, you chose to be here, which means that we have an opportunity, and we can give ourselves permission not to worry too much about the mechanics of prayer, but to imbue our prayers with a real intention, maybe even to hold a part of our heart out in our hands. Because ultimately, that is how we draw near, right? We draw close not only in prayer, but in life when we put our whole selves in, with all of the risk and vulnerability and energy that that entails. We connect more deeply to ourselves, to each other, and maybe to a sense of the divine that is present in every moment. We get the most out of life when we put our whole selves in. After all, that's what it's all about. Shabbat shalom.